In 1994, my family joined Adventist Frontier Missions and went to the Philippines to a very remote tribe. This tribe, various different Christian groups have been trying to reach for the last 400 years, and there was still not a single convert in this tribe. Centuries of abuse and fighting between lowland immigrants and the Spanish occupation, the Japanese occupation during the war, all of these things over hundreds of years had raised cultural barriers so high that the gospel simply could not cross when it was carried by locals. It required somebody from the outside who didn't have that cultural baggage and was able to come with a kind of a fresh perspective. But also it took someone who was willing to take the time. Most people who had tried to reach these people in the past had come in, done a quick evangelistic series, had done maybe a medical mission, at the most had spent a couple of months, maybe a year at the most, and it wasn't enough time for these people who were still very scared, had really had bad experiences with people from the outside. It wasn't enough time for them to overcome that fear and that mistrust. We stayed there for 8 years, the first time, for our first section of that project, 8 years full-time. We learned the language, we learned the culture very deeply, we ministered to them over many years, lived with them, not just coming and going, and was finally able to gain their trust and to lead a number of them to faith in Jesus, and then train them to reach their own people, to continue on the work that we had started there. Very similar actually to the way that Paul and the apostles did missions as they were taught by Jesus. So we continued working with these people, though, even after we weren't there full-time for a period of time, especially like while I was in college. We would travel back and forth. Like while I was in college every summer, I would come back to the Philippines, visit with them a while, especially after my parents, as they were getting older. They had, like my dad, had malaria more than 100 times, and he had multiple drug-resistant malaria. So when he was no longer able to travel there, I started taking over a lot of the mentorship of the leaders there, until after college I came back and worked with the next tribe south for another number of years. All in all, I've been working now with these tribes for 30 years, since 1994. And by God's grace, the 4 churches that my parents and I, between our 2 projects, the 4 churches that we planted and the leaders that we trained in those churches have now multiplied. They have planted more their own churches to where now there are 47 churches in 5 different tribes with more than 2,700 baptized believers. In fact, we don't actually know how many believers there are because there's so many of them deep up into the mountains. It's growing much faster than we can keep up with anymore. But we know of at least 2,700 baptized believers in those areas, and they're continuing to grow. This is the type of mission work that God has called me to. And when my project got to the point where they were doing the job better than I could, they were more effective at missions and were growing faster actually, I knew it was time for me to go into what we call phase out. That means that we don't abandon the project, we don't leave them, but we're no longer there full-time to where it can create kind of a dependence on us. It gives them kind of space to grow into the mission work and to stand on their own 2 feet, but we're still close enough, we still visit back and forth, because there's always a dip. When the missionary leaves the project, there's always a dip. So we can be there to help reduce that dip and to help solve problems and just kind of head off Satan's attempts to stop that project, to stop it from growing. So at that time, I took over the leadership of Philippine Frontier Missions, and while I continue mentoring the leaders on my project, I am now training and teaching and guiding other missionaries all around the Philippines that are also working in similar unreached areas with tribes that really have no Christian presence or no Adventist presence. We would think of the Philippines as a very reached nation, but the truth is that almost all of the baptisms that we hear about and all of the Adventists that we hear about are amongst what we would call the lowland Filipino population. Whereas there are still many tribes, there are actually 30 tribes in the Philippines that have 0 Christians at all, and many more that have 0 Adventist presence at all. And these people groups are not effectively being reached, especially as the majority of the evangelism that is going on both locally and from foreign evangelists that come in is just quick hit and run type of evangelism, and that doesn't work with these very resistant and very remote unreached people groups. So over the course of the next couple of months, we're going to be talking more about how this works, some of the stories from my mission work, and I'll be giving you regular updates and asking also for your prayers as we continue facing new challenges and see new growth in the mission work around the Philippines and even beyond.